Welcome to the RISE Annual Conference 2021 in hybrid format. Welcome to our participants in Oxford in our hub here. Welcome to those in Washington, DC at the hub there, and to Abuja at the hub in Abuja, Nigeria. I'm going to hand straight over just after a couple of very brief remarks. The first to say is we're going to do our best to run on time. Our speakers will have 15 minutes, and we'll hold them to that, but there will be plenty of time for Q&A at the end after the speakers have spoken, and the chairs will handle that. And also to introduce you to the fact that the RISE Encyclopedia is launching today, and there will be slides up during the break that will enable you to explore that. So over to our first session chair, who is Luis Crouch.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to, I don't know what this is, the 5th RISE conference, first session. So I'm Luis Crouch from RTI, but also from the intellectual leadership team of the RISE project and the research directorate. And I'm very happy to share the session. Should be quite interesting. We'll be talking about data from learning assessments and how they get used or not used. At least that is the common thread. I think some of the presentations actually have a slightly different emphasis, but that is the common thread, and it's a very interesting thread, as you will see. So let's kick off the presentations. We have 3 presenters. The first one, and I'm not sure we'll stick to this order, but let me just say them as they are on the program, will be Mite Abra from the Institute for Educational Planning and Administration from the University of the Cape Coast, presenting on whether high-stakes exams present consistent, and I would add useful information about educational standards, or promote consistent standards and information about standards. The second one will be by Sehar Said from Idara-e-Talib, I don't know that I can say that, but from Acer, Pakistan, and presenting on expanding citizen choice in citizen voice in education systems accountability, and some evidence from the citizen-led assessments. And lastly, Masuda Bano from Oxford on the need for fresh thinking in using community mobilization to extract or develop accountability in education, and using data for that, I hope, inter alia at least. Okay, so let's pass it off to Mike.
So really a good question to ask, do high-stake exam promote consistent educational standards? I think that's the piece of study Center for Global Development and Institute for Educational Planning intends to present at this year's event. So in terms of the menu for today, we have 5 dishes being served. Background and motivation for this presentation begins, and then the study design will follow, and then our highlights of findings come, and then finally, we will do a bit of deep dive in terms of discussion and reflection based on this study. Across the globe, one thing is unique that we know about exams, indeed high-stakes exam. What we know is clear, that ministries of education, institutions, parents, households, universities, and indeed higher education sectors are really interested in exam results, much as the job opportunity platforms as well as livelihood sources are linked to exams and what comes along with it. In this particular presentation, we focus on what we know from the science and the development activities. So in this particular regard, 2 things are flagged. High-stake exams serve one, the purpose of determining university placement, job placement, and to that end, it needs to be quite unpredictable. Point number two, we need to maintain consistent standard for educational system, which we can only get comparable exam over time as a basis to do so. But these two particular purposes of high-stake exam are in contention. One, we know that the two objectives seeks to do two different things. One high stakes, the other low stakes. And therefore, we investigate Ghana's secondary school leaving certificate exam, which explicitly is intended to maintain consistent standards for the educational system, thereby serving the two rules as advanced, and indeed as indicated as in contention with each other. The next point we know is that the body that undertakes this was established in the year 1952, and year on year, close to 2 million candidates sit for this exam. We know also that fixed standards achieved is also undertaken via the platform of expert judgment. But one thing we know is that retains the goal of ensuring that degrees in West Africa do not represent anything lower than the standards attainment of equivalent certificate in the United Kingdom, something that continues to be a focus for WAEC as we know it. But what does the storyline tell us? Our motivation for this study is as a result of what we knew from the year 2018, 2018-19, when we conducted a study around how the results from WAEC, and for that matter, the WASI exam, being the West African certificate, secondary school certificate exam, swings. The swings, as we see from both the left and the right, provide a vivid picture of what we are talking about. And so in terms of English, we see some changes in actual results, those who got pass or better, or credit or better as shown on your slides. But for the purposes of this study, we take a deep dive into mathematics because of its peculiar nature. Indeed, the theories we use to engage the science here are those that are consistent with what we know objective type items, or objective scoring becomes the most appropriate strategy to use to engage the science we used. That was not mostly going to work for the English. And so the English language we relegated, and from henceforth, we pick up on the mathematics. So we ask a central question. Our central question then is, can changes in student performance be explained by changes in examination difficulty from year to year? That becomes a central question we intend to answer in this study. Thus, we chose to deal with this concern using an approach. Our approach is that there is an analytical challenge which needs to be overcome in the study. One, having to do with the fact that WASI has no overlapping items, need to do non-equivalent group of students each year, non-equivalent group of students sit for this exam every year. Based on this appreciation of analytical challenge available, we undertook 5 major steps. Step number 1, we collect all items from past WASI, English and Maths, 2011 to 2019. But like I said earlier, our major focus now hereafter is about the English. The mathematics, core mathematics only. We prepare hybrid test booklets containing items from each year. And then we filter this to a single sample of students who were just about writing the WASI exam to see how they perform on them. And indeed to establish our hunch. Randomly assign test booklets to students, and then we went ahead to analyze all items. And indeed, in our analysis of the items, we took into consideration 2 major steps. In the case of step number 1, we took note of the fact that all this work we did has something to do with item response theory as well as classical test theory. So we first activated classical test theory, where items analysis was central, and then we later on took on item response theory, where we engaged the parameters of the items in terms of their difficulty indices or otherwise. Having done that, we took the next step of making sure that we filter these items to final year candidates, and indeed 4,380 persons from category A school, 9 of them, 11 category B, and then 9 category C from Western, Central, and Greater Accra regions of Ghana. The sample does not need to be nationally representative, as we are interested in population parameters. So the sample does not need to cover the full range of performance, because certainly we have scores close to 100, much as we have scores lower in the population so examined. But what are our findings? From the study we did, the findings that came up can be classified into two. Large differences in WASI test difficulty affect the proportion of students reaching important grade boundaries each year. Number two, compared to any exam fixed difficulty, these test differences create exam excess failures or passes each year. Indeed, for the category of stakeholders mentioned earlier, these are worth examining into detail. But first, let's reflect on the finding number one. Take to your left the figure we see, the population of WASI exam takers compared to our sample exam takers. To the left, these are actual performance proportions as we see from WASI. But in our case, to the right, what we see is the indices of difficulty that comes along with the test we fielded. Now let's take it one by one. The 2011 pass rate is close to around 80%. Compare it to the right, which was done in our exam. Maybe move on to year number 2012. Again, go to the right. 2013 through 15. Then move away from that and start from 2016 and maybe get to 2018 and pause for a minute in 2017. And then finally, let's journey from 2018 to 2019. There is some form of resemblance. And indeed, apart from 2017, that doesn't have a mirror image largely, all the remaining years, difficulty indices was moving along with the WASI exam as seen for core mathematics. If we want to get a picture more carefully, this means that difficulty has an affinity with the performance as we see year on year. Taken together, what we have now is, as a consequence of that, once we remove the variation in test difficulty, what we are left with is what we just see here, where only 70 to around 80% in that range, rather than more erratic changes occur. For the blue line representing pass or better, and then in this particular case, credit or better being 30, which means there's no when we difficulty, as it were, in the exams. Therefore, other things which in the literature and other past studies continue to show that were possible consequence of performance, this study is indicating that there is something quite superior that is bringing the change.
Mike, you have about 4 minutes to finish, 3 or 4 minutes to finish.
Why will we call, thank you very much. Why will we call this a direct consequence? Largely because of what we know. Point number two, compared to any exam of fixed difficulty, these differences create excess failures or passes, as it were. So as we established, if we take to the left in 2011 to 2019, and we look at the caliber of exam takers in the column 2, column 3 historically appreciate the fail rates, column 4 gives us a new lens where we establish that excess failures occur in the sample of test takers originally in those years if difficulty indices is anything to go by. And thus, we are able to indicate that 7.7% persons wouldn't have passed if the exam was not relatively easier for them. So was the case with 2012 of 12.2%, and in 2019, 10.2%. But in the cases of 2013, 14, the excess failures, again, as we see there, could have been managed if difficulty in this was not anything to go by. So taken together, all these exams, we took 2017 as the base year. If that was the year that is comparable year, this is the kind of fluctuation we see in the excess passes and then excess failures, as it were. So this brings us to the discussion we do on this study. That is, we have 4 key reflections here. The first one is changes in test difficulty explain 80% of the variance in core mathematics pass grade awarded from 2011 to 2019. And indeed, large swings in exam difficulty have significant implication for fairness and efficiency. Largely, half of candidates who failed to earn a math certificate in 2015 would have done so in 2019, indeed as a result of the difficulty indices. Several technical fixes could partially resolve the challenge related to test difficulty. For example, the new statistical input to standard setting meetings could make a change. But this failed to address the central concern, which is the underlying challenge related to single assessment serving a screening purpose, as well as maintaining consistent exam standard. Therefore, in all this, we go back to the initial question. Do high-stake exam answer that's the trick of screening as well as maintaining consistent educational standards? This study provides a reflection for the future. But centrally, it helps address the sustainable development goals, the African AU Agenda 2063, Africa we want, as well as national priorities for education, and for the WASI case for the entire West African English-speaking countries. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Mike. You made it with only about 30 seconds of excess time, which is okay. Let's move on to Sehar Saeed, and we'll pass on directly to her it'll be run from Oxford, so she'll have to say, next slide, please, and so on.
Thank you very much. Hello, everyone. My name is Sehar Saeed, and I'll be representing PAL Network as well as ITA. The topic of my presentation is how the evidence from citizen-led assessments is creating accountability at both the local level as well as at the national level. Next slide, please. So over the past decade, we have seen and witnessed that international and national education agendas have begun to emphasize the improvement of the quality rather than the quantity of education in developing countries. The trend has been paralleled by a significant increase in the use of educational assessments to measure gains and losses in the quality of learning. As interest in these assessments has grown, low-income countries have begun to adopt and adapt international and other large-scale assessments for a variety of uses. including comparing national quality with other countries, improved ways of measuring reading achievement, and further attempts to reach marginalized population within a country. Amongst these, a new model, which is now not slightly, but yes, has gained actually an advantage as well as recognition all across the globe, is the model of the citizen-led assessments. Citizen-led large-scale household-based assessments are gathering momentum by illustrating the power of informed citizenry to influence national and global agendas for education and learning. Next slide, please. Till date, for over a decade now, the citizen-led assessments actually have reached out to 15 countries. They have actually taken into account, more than 100,000 plus volunteers. They're reaching out to all rural and some of the urban districts within their own country. The results are shared at both national and international level, as well as the local level. They are representative also at district, provincial, and national level. The findings are disseminated at multiple levels to inform policy making, which includes not only at the national one, but also the data is shared with district level education authorities, with the communities, with parents, with teachers, with volunteers, so that it creates a long-term short route as well as a long route accountability. So the purpose of my presentation is to highlight how the evidence collected by these citizen-led assessments is influencing governance and accountability at the community, provincial, and national levels, number one. It will also explain how a community-led approach to data gathering and analysis and context can bring about appropriate response from other stakeholders. Next slide, please. So just to give an overview of PAL Network, what is citizen-led assessment and how it's being done. So PAL Network, which is People Action for Learning Network, is the headquarter of all citizen-led assessment, which is managed and based in Kenya. And it has a partner of 15 countries, including Pakistan, India, Nepal, Bangladesh, Nigeria, Mali, Senegal, Mexico, etc. And all these countries are following the same model through which they are collecting information at the household level by using and training volunteers. So, by using a very simple kind of a methodology, by having very simple tools, the countries are actually gathering information from the household level. And why these assessments is important is because of the fact that, many of the kids in these developing countries are not going to school. And the assessment that are taking place by, taking or organized by the government are actually, sometimes the data does not reach, the policymaker themselves, or the data is not distributed to the parents and teachers, and people who are actually the right stakeholder will never know whether their kids and children are learning or not. Also, many of the children, especially after COVID also, are not going to school at all. So the assessment that take place only at the school level will not give a true kind of a background or true picture of how, actually how many kids are going to school, and those who are actually going to school are learning or not. So the idea behind the citizen-led assessment is to reach the most marginalized children, number one, to reach each and every child, whether going to school or not going to school, and to assess them on very simple tools by using the power of volunteers, so that people actually will get connected, that somebody from the same community is coming to the household, knocking the door and asking the kids how much they have learned and telling the results right then straight away. So that's actually the power of citizen-led assessment that has been over for in India and Pakistan, it has been more than a decade that the countries are producing annual status of education reports and sharing the results every year. And the results are also available on the website. The data set also is being used readily, not only by locally by the governments, but also internationally as well, by many other organizations. Next slide, please. So just to explain the theory of change, the idea behind the citizen-led assessments, which is a very simple one. So number one, we mobilize partners as well as volunteers to collect evidence. Like that, I've mentioned that the whole idea behind the citizen-led assessment is to mobilize partners and volunteers, and not any other external party, so that people actually do get involved and do see that what is going on around. So each of the organization implementing citizen-led assessment works with a network of partners across the respective countries to mobilize and train volunteers in the use of a very simple tool for effectively measuring children basic reading and math levels. Then the findings are communicated. So the findings are collated to provide estimates of reading and math abilities for children aged 5 to 16. The age group depends and vary from country to country. In Pakistan, it is 5 to 16 because the right to education mentions that every child, whoever is falling in the grade group 5 to 16 it's the state responsibility to provide them with free and quality education. So that is why most of the countries, the age band also revolves in the same revolves from 5 to 16 or from 6 to 16, because the idea is that if it is a state responsibility that every child is supposed to be having free and quality education, how many of them actually are receiving that? So that is the idea, that the survey is then conducted to see that how many of kids are actually receiving free and quality education. So the findings are then communicated. The results are widely disseminated through national and local media. In many cases, organizations also work at a local level to share findings with parents and communities during the assessment process itself, and afterwards through local gatherings, through seminars, through policy debates, so that each and every person, each and every stakeholder is involved. Communities, the process does not end here. It does not only just transfer the information, but it also mobilizes communities for accountability and action. The information is then used to engage community and youth leaders, parents, and others to take actions to improve learning on their own, and through working with their local school and leaders to advocate for change. The governments are also reached out to improve learning. The information is used to engage directly with national and subnational policymakers to encourage the government to take steps to improve learning outcomes. In many cases, in many countries, organizations, we work collaboratively with the government to offer solutions. And also, we then try to reset the education agenda to focus on learning. For instance, the citizen-led assessment data is also being used to track the Sustainable Development Goal number 4. Over time, the results are used to highlight trends and persistent gaps to make the case for global and country-level goal targets and indicators related to learning outcomes. And even for Pakistan, we are very proud to say that the data set is being used by the government very readily. It is being used as a key reference documents by the policymakers themselves. It is also being quoted by Economic Survey of Pakistan. It is quoted by Global Education Monitoring Report. It is quoted by UNESCO. So each and every organization, each and every person is trying to use the data set to actually see that what can be done to improve learning outcomes, what is the actual situation, and how this data set, how the findings from the data set can actually help to pave and then also design new solutions. Next slide, please. So the rigor and stages of mobilization, like I've already mentioned, that the whole idea behind, as indicated by the theory of change, that the citizen participation is built into the very design of the assessment process. The tools are designed to be simple so that parents, teachers, schools, and community members can both conduct the assessment themselves and understanding the finding with ease. The approach is led by local organizations and involves thousands of local volunteers, which embeds another element of ownership and citizen participation. Accountability is part and parcel of the ultimate objectives of these assessment exercises that aim to engage citizens everywhere in understanding their situation and taking action to influence education policy and practice from the ground up. The dissemination stages are multiple. For instance, in Pakistan, India, and also in other countries, the findings are disseminated starting from the national level where the national launch is conducted. And then, the information is repackaged into a lot of material. For example, it is repackaged in the form of policy briefs, into form of news clippings, in the form of articles, in the form of small videos, small report cards, which are also translated in multiple languages, so that the information is shared not only with the high-level policymakers, but also with simple volunteers, with media people, with community members, through different means, through different approaches, so that information is not only stays within the organization, but is also passed on to each and every stakeholder that has a role to play in changing the education landscape of the respective countries. Next slide, please. So like I've already mentioned, that all the information that is being collected by all the respective countries has an evidence that they've actually tried to mobilize not only the policymakers, the politicians, etc., but also they've tried to mobilize citizens and volunteers and youth in their respective processes. And I will also explain it through the examples coming up in the next slide. Next slide, please. So for instance, in Mali, Senegal, and East Africa, have invited local elected officials, district education officers, and others to participate in their assessments. Even in countries like Pakistan and India, that is mandatory, that once the results are being finalized, they're always shared with district education authorities, because even in Pakistan and India, in low
You have
Nepal and
5 minutes. You have 5 minutes.
Yeah. Okay. And Nepal and Bangladesh also, in low and middle income countries, the district education authorities have a much larger role to play. So and also the data set is also shared with bureaucrats and with policymakers as well. And all these respective countries also have started using social media in their campaigns. In Pakistan, we started off with a campaign of politician knocking on the door. So for the purpose of this campaign was to put education issues on the election agenda, giving citizens a platform to demand better access and quality of education from the political leaders. So we actually reached out to 22 prominent politicians who were approached and participated, and we visited their constituencies so that we can collect information and then share it with them, so that and mobilize them that something needs to be done. So even in India also, there was this campaign of Lakho Make or 1 in 100,000 campaign that involved finding volunteers in over 1 lakh villages to conduct a complete census of children learning levels. And it's not that the information, it was just collected. The information was also shared in the form of a report card with the community. So all these examples suggest that the citizen-led assessments are using the power of social media so that they can reach out to masses. They're also trying to, of course, mobilize government and other stakeholders and policymakers and politicians, because they are the high level stakeholders who can actually bring up a change in the form of policies. But at the other hand, also they feel that the power of the change should come from the community, from the bottom itself. So that is why they're also focusing upon community also, that the volunteers who actually are trained by using this fantastic methodology, a very easy one that collects information from the field, the same volunteers are then actually mobilized so that they can go back to the field and then give the findings to the community, try to tell them that this is the problem of coming up from your school, this is the place where children are not turning, this school actually has low water facilities, what needs to be done, because I guess some smaller problems can be dealt at the community level themselves, and yes, some larger level problems are dealt by the community. So that's the power of citizen-led assessment, that is not only limited to just policymaker bureaucrats, but also trying to create accountability at the local level by using multiple means. Next slide, please. So just to let you know about the Asar advocacy campaign, next slide. So so I'll just very briefly speak about how in Pakistan we communicate our findings through multiple levels. Number one, at the village level, for instance, we have these very small gatherings which is known as village Pratham. We mobilize citizens. We have a very small kind of a gathering where we invite parents, teachers, community members, as well as a local person from influential person from the same village, so that we can actually translate, or we can provide them with a very brief kind of information of how the village has been performing, so that they can actually do something about it at the local level. Then there's a district level kind of information dissemination system where we reach out to district level education authorities, try to give them a clear picture of how their district is performing, try to provide them with recommendation that this is the problem of your district, this is how it is performing against other adjoining districts also, and what needs to be done, how many schools were visited, what kind of problems the schools were facing when we visited them, or how many children were surveyed, so on and so forth. So these kind of very small information and start, definitely we feel that if it is brought to light and if it is shared by with different people who actually have a role to play, can definitely bring a change. Then at the provincial, which is at the state and the national level, the findings are shared at the national level in the form of a launch, and then we have provincial launches also respectively, where we invite other organizations, we invite bureaucrats, we invite policymakers, we invite think tanks, innovators, private partners, so that they can also come up and bring solutions. So these are the people who actually then come and witness the launch and then see that, okay, this is how the province or this is how the state is performing. These are the areas that needs urgent attention. These are the areas that are performing well. These are the areas that are not performing well at all. So then then after sharing the findings, we definitely follow up with them and see that whether there was a follow-up or whether there was a need to actually help them out in translating all the information in the form of, you can say, a service delivery program or a solution. So that, and there are examples even in Pakistan also,
you have 1 minute. 1 minute.
Okay, I'll just try to wrap up. So that's how ensure that can I just move to the last slide, please? The second last one, please. Yes, this one, the contribution to the field. Thank you very much. So in short, the large scale annual citizen-led nationwide assessments are just not an audit, but they generate an enormous energy and synergy, because they actually invite people and volunteers and simple people so that they can be a part and parcel of the theory as well as of the process. It is an evaluation of citizen, parents, and government performance. It brings education issues to the forefront by involving all stakeholders from local to global. It provides large-scale data set, and that can be used by everybody. And the data set is also being shared with community, villages, the district, state, and national level to actually bring about change. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much. I think that was pretty much on time. we're going to then finish up with Masuda, who will be talking about Pratham's experience in mobilization. And that will be our last presentation, and then we'll have time for comments, questions, and answers. Thanks very much. Go ahead, Masuda.
Thanks, Luis. So I'll start now. I hope the system works, and I'm clicking that the slide moves. If it doesn't move in a minute, then let me know it's a bit slow. So basically, just to explain, the paper I'm presenting today is coming out of the PET-I. It's one of the RISE studies and the political economy of implementation work strand. And the reason I'm partly explaining it is to explain that this particular paper is actually a response to some results coming out of the earlier studies, like some of the other studies I've been leading in the PET-I. And one of them, one second, sorry, is the slide that I see. I'm really sorry, which slide are you seeing? Can you, because the one I'm seeing is way advanced.
Right now I'm seeing lessons from Pratham's approach.
Yeah, it should be, it's not the, let me just see if I can click back. Otherwise I have to give the access to the, is the screen there? I've lost the screen altogether.
Yeah.
I think we'll come back.
Thanks, Mahmood. I think we'll take over the control of the
so
slides.
Yeah, so
this,
please just do the first slide. Thanks.
Yeah,
sorry for that.
brilliant. No worries.
So basically, so just to say, it's coming out of the earlier sort of work from the Nigeria study that we were doing, in which we are looking at the importance of school-based management committees. Because as you understand, when we look at bottom-up reforms in education sector, for is it working?
Hi, Masuda. Yeah, if you just continue the slides, we can see the slides.
But can you hear me? Because my side got stuck completely.
You, yeah.
Okay, fine. Sorry for this. I don't know what's happening today. So yes, so in the last 20-25 years, there's been a lot of emphasis on fixing the, trying to improve governance of education through this so-called short route of accountability.
Okay, Masuda, we're just going to turn your video off and see if we can keep losing you a little bit there.
Is it, so should I carry on?
Yeah, if you can carry on, but if you could just turn your video off, that'd be great, just to preserve bandwidth.
I don't know what's happening, but I'm sitting in my Oxford office, so it's very.
Yeah, just dropped. Okay, we'll just stand by whilst we wait for Masuda to rejoin us. Hi, Lewis. It might be useful just to maybe go to the Q&A whilst we wait for Masuda to come back on, if that's okay with you.
Okay, well, it seems we're having some technical glitches, and we will move on to the Q&A and then give her a chance to come back in. So just to provide a little bit of context for the Q&A, and we'll move on to that right away. One frustration of being a chair is that I myself have questions, but I don't want to monopolize things so as to give everybody else a chance. I will send them the questions or comments individually through email. So the one common thread in all this is the role of data and its possible use for accountability. And I found, I have to telegraph you Masuda's final conclusions because I've read her paper. But in order to find the common thread amongst these, I have to kind of telegraph her final results. But we have one presentation which shows sort of what happens if you have essentially bad data, and what can you do and what are the limits to what you can do about accountability if your data aren't the best, or if they have some internal contradictions in purpose. And that was one interesting line. And the second presentation says, okay, if the data are pretty good, what can you do about enhancing its use for accountability through communities and the base of the pyramid, for those familiar with the accountability triangle. And then the third one, and I may be over telegraphing here, Masuda, I hope you forgive me, kind of concludes that mobilization that assumes a supply response from the schools may not be enough, that the base of the triangle may not be working as well as it could be if the assumption is that the schools as bureaucratic entities, as public entities will respond. So it's saying having data is not enough if the people that you're seeking to pressure with it will not respond. So that's kind of an interesting three-part package or three messages. You have to have good data, you have to be able to use it, but people have to be able to respond. And if they don't respond, what are your options? But I think with that in mind,
Luis, I'm back if you want me, but the video is off. I don't know what has happened today. I'm sitting in office in Oxford, but it's just not working right.
Okay.
Do you want me to carry on, or if you can do without me, I'm fine.
Yeah, no, I think, can you just give a kind of really compressed summary?
Yeah, I can. So should I just do that? And we won't use the slides really, because I think they might again get jammed and we might have a problem. So I can just give you the main essence of the paper and you weave it in with the other findings and of the session, which is this, that this particular study that I was presenting today, as you can even see from the title of it, is really meant at provoking us to think that do we really need to review within the development community? It's more like looking at the development policies of community participation. That are they effective, or do we really need to start thinking of fresh way of thinking? And why do why do I sort of take a look like this? And that's what I was trying to explain before we got disconnected. That this concern is coming out of some of the earlier sort of PETI studies, especially one in Nigeria, where I looked at the school-based management committees. Because if you look at it in terms of development policy, within the last 20 years, the emphasis on short route of accountability and bottom-up reforms has led to a lot of emphasis on establishing SBMCs, what we call school-based management, in slightly different models. All like most developing country governments have adopted them, and it's a policy, it's a suggestion that comes normally from the donor agencies. And cumulatively, we now have quite a bit of evidence, even synthesis papers looking at evidence from different studies, which show two main limitations. First, in many cases, SBMCs, a national policy now exists, but they stay dormant. Like they just don't come about actively. And in other cases where donor put in money, like the Nigeria study, to establish these SBMCs, they become very active for the time the donor money was there, but still the desired impact, which is to improve teacher accountability, principal accountability, to lead to better sort of attendance and then better results. We don't see that evidence. Yet the same policy keeps getting emphasized and a lot of donor money keeps going into it and government keep emphasizing it. So out of that study, the concern that was coming is that maybe we need to think about other ways of engaging community participation rather than emphasizing so much on the school-based management model. And that's what led to the Pratham study, to see if we can learn from other examples, because Pratham is a very interesting case from India, an organization, an NGO, which is sort of known very well now across India, but also globally in the development circles quite well, for being very good with community participation, very effective with community participation in multiple ways in the education sector. So they use community participation very actively to implement the basic education model, which is to support teaching in state schools through supporting weaker children through a method they call teaching at the right level. They also run independent programs apart from the state schools of using the same method. And secondly, that is on the implementation part. But even on the advocacy part, the presentation that was made before, actually, just before me, Seher's work, a lot of that kind of work has been inspired by Pratham because of its this ASAR program, this whole sort of data gathering at the community level. This is very much a Pratham's led initiative. ITA, Seher is with ITA, and that organization I know has taken the idea initially from Pratham. So it's and again, I can save my time there by saying that what Seher was emphasizing, this model, as she told us, is very community led. So volunteers are mobilized and they gather all the data, and there are various benefits of it. Not necessarily, I won't agree with all the benefit that Seher was saying, but yeah, there are some benefits of it in terms of advocacy, especially at the higher level. So I thought, let's look at Pratham example for two purposes. So there are two things one is trying to do analytically here. One is that can we, by looking at a successful community mobilization effort, can we deduce something and say, why are these SBMCs failing? You know, this effort to have this active school management committees where communities and parents come together to monitor school effectiveness. Could it be that by looking at Pratham and community mobilization, we can say something about that, how SBMCs can be better organized? One aspect is that. And secondly, just to open-mindedly look at Pratham's activities and see, are there some activities there which development community hasn't really sort of picked up, and maybe they can be, developed more and lead to better community participation and more effective improvement in learning outcomes. So that was the inspiration for the two, for this paper. And to give you a short answer quickly is this one, that on the first question, or are we doing something, is Pratham mobilizing in a way that helps us learn something and say something about the failure of donor-led SBMCs mobilizing communities? And there are three interesting findings, I think, there that I like to highlight. One is that this whole issue of whether communities in these kind of political economies where, the long route of accountability, which means democratic structures, accountable politicians, bureaucrats, where they don't exist, can communities from the bottom really hold these teachers and low-tier government service accountable at the district government level? Because what Pratham model is telling us is they work very closely with the community, with the teachers, state school teachers, principals, and district government, but they don't try to monitor. There's never language of monitoring. It's always supporting. You're supporting the teacher. You are building a conducive relationship so that they listen to you. Because the political economy is just not the type where you can sit as monitors on the teachers, because you don't control their salaries, and you don't. The politicians don't necessarily listen to the community. So do you understand? So the whole emphasis that the development community has, that you can put parents on the school boards and they'll hold teachers suddenly accountable, in overall failing political economy structures which are not accountable, where politicians are not accountable to the public or bureaucrats are. It's not working. So do you understand? The attitude of engagement is very different. It's not accountability, it's supporting. And then in that case, it works. That's one thing. Secondly, and this finding, sorry, is all, I realize I just 1 minute, but I'll just say that this finding is also coming out with few other NGO experiences we are studying, that it's a supporting role, not accountability role that works. So that's a very fundamental problem with the assumptions that the development agencies have. Second big issue that I'm also raising in this paper is that the nature of information. The development agencies and this SBMC model is based on the assumption that you inform the communities, and somehow they're very altruistic communities. Once you go and mobilize them and tell them about quality or importance of education, they'll start contributing to collective good.
Masuda, you have 1 minute.
So on this one, even on this issue, what we are finding is that it doesn't work like that. Pratham incentivizes communities by very individual-based incentives. Do you understand? So the volunteers who teach in his classes have direct incentives for doing it because they can get recognition from Pratham certificate, which can help them move on. And secondly, the way to mobilize the community, one last point I'll raise, is not through like giving them general information about education is good for you, which as they show, communities already realize. They focus a lot on telling them how to monitor And that's where the strength of Pratham is with us program as well. They engage the community members a lot in teaching them how you can monitor quality of learning in schools using very simple tools. And then you engage communities very differently. So the message there is that the kind of information you give to the community matters, and donors are not giving the right kind of information. And lastly, this was what's flawed, what's the limitation of the existing models. The last, in terms of its own interventions, there are quite a few interesting new things that Pratham is doing, but I don't have the time to explain to it. But all I'm saying is that in the paper itself, you'll see quite interesting examples of different ways, non-SBMC kind of initiatives that can involve community and education. Sorry, because of technical limitation, this presentation has been a bit messed up. Yeah.
Sorry about that. So just to make things manageable here, I would suggest a couple of things. One is we'll take 3 questions and I'll read them just so that the whole panel, everybody in attendance knows what they are, and I'll direct them to the presenters. But I would suggest there's so much rich stuff in the Q&A that it's clear we won't be able to do honor to much of it. So if people would volunteer, the panelists would volunteer to put into the chat, not into the Q&A, but into the chat, your email addresses. Perhaps that's one way to do it. If you want to keep it private, I understand, that's fine. But if you want to put them into the chat, and or if the conference organizers can share people's email addresses. So let me go ahead and read off the sort of starting 3 questions. One is from Ruth Naylor and seems to be mostly directed at MITE. And she says, while the consistency of high stakes examinations over time is clearly problematic, is the data still potentially useful for assessing equity? After all, it's effectively a census data set in the school population rather than a sample survey. Are we ignoring a potentially useful source of learning data on the basis of the lack of consistency over time? The second one, I think, is mostly for Sehar, but maybe Masuda can come in. And it says, in India and Pakistan, ACER and PAL have become very established organizations. Can citizen-led assessments eventually be run in a more decentralized manner without a big organization like ACER or PAL leading it? Would that data be taken seriously? And then the third question is also for MITE, and it's a 2-barrel question. And it's did WAEC, the West African Examinations Council, pre-test the items in the test and select them to moderate level of difficulty over time, or as well? Okay, so did they moderate things through item analysis of some kind? And if the concern is with fairness between years, why not norm reference the test so as to give the same percentage of credits each year? So we'll have the panelists address those, please. And I would say in this order, MITE addresses the 2 questions to him, and then we'll have Sehar and Masuda address the question that is more related to PAL. Thanks.
Right. Thank you very much, Louis. And I think that the point about the question from
don't worry about it, where it's from.
Yeah, but the key thing we take away from that particular one is the fact that there is, we are not suggesting in this particular study that we have to ignore or lack of inconsistency. You see, the fact is we are encouraging open access and use of exam data for exactly the sort of question that are posed. And so the only problem is difficulty in accessing microdata that can make us do the kind of things that is needed. But largely, the issue of gender variation in all this can be established, as it were. And the pool of respondents we picked up for this study can do so. But the literature continues to argue how high stakes and low stakes exams are picked up by people and used. At least the work we know from largely from Asia continue to indicate that there is some interesting feed we're getting around how boys do well on high stakes and girls do well on low stakes exam. That argument can be taken forward in several other contexts. But the biggest takeaway from all this is that we definitely want to make a case that from this particular study, there are several things that can move on from there. But because of time, let me move on to the issue that has been raised by, I think, regarding the WAEC pretest exam. Indeed, WAEC has a number of interesting approaches to getting this, which is kind of quality assured, their processes and all that. But beyond all those, we come to what we found, because we didn't understand the erratic situation, did field test some of the things we found. We studied in the field and came out with the kind of questions we came with. So to our best of our knowledge, WAEC does pretest in a limited way, but it's clearly not sufficient from what we see from this. And in terms of statistical significance for this, the linking of the equations in terms of grade and the competencies, we saw some differential in terms of cognitive as well as content domains of what is being assessed to the learners. So largely, the contention is how we can use the same exam to do selection and placement purpose, and at the same time to undertake system efficient measures. And that's the kind of contention we see using this same exam to do.
Okay, thanks very much, Mike. Let's move on to Sehan and then Masuda quickly. Okay, Sehan.
Yes, because primarily it says that although all these citizen-led assessments are being managed by big organization, but at the end of the day, whenever the report is not, it all depends upon that, how the assessment was conducted and with support from how many partners. So the question is now that, even already, we never say that, ASER or the citizen-led assessment are being conducted by these respective organizations, for example, Pratham or ITA, although they are at the back end, they're able to mobilize these volunteers because, the spread and scope of the survey is extremely large. And even in India, Pakistan, other countries are reaching out to, all these rural households, reaching out to, many kids and households, as well as also schools and other stakeholders. So I guess it's not about that, one single organization is actually, trying to push this ahead. It's always, it's a kind of a partnership. And yes, the idea of citizen-led assessment is based on these partnerships, that, it deals on these partnerships, that these many organizations have actually joined their hands together to conduct these assessments. So of course, one organization is necessary so that they can provide kind of, say, a spearheading that can serve as a role as a spearheading body. For instance, we have PAL network, which is mobilizing all these countries as well. But yes, at the end of the day, it is the work of the volunteers as well as the partners who are collecting information, who are coming together all together. Yeah, thank you.
Lewis, on that, I'll have a very quick response, save your time, which is this, that I think having a legitimate established organization behind the scene is important for the data to be taken seriously. So if I didn't know that Pratham is behind ASER, it will take me a long time to be convinced of, do you understand what it stands for? So I don't think, so I respect the argument she's trying to make that it's participatory. They want to sell it that way, and it is participatory, but without an established organization behind it, I don't think you can have legitimate, conviction in that data. The trust won't be there that quickly.
Yeah, thanks. Again, thanks for that. And, if there's some overlap between the questions, panelists, please just refer to your previous answer or shorten your answer appropriately. So from Marla Spivak to Masuda, some of your previous work looks at the way that donor support or donor meddling in community-based mobilization actually undermines their effectiveness. You mentioned that the push on SBMCs has come from donors. Are you concerned that this push can have the same counterproductive effect in education that you saw in community development in Pakistan in your past work? And there's a question for Sehar. Might citizen-led accountability actually create more tensions and disagreements in the system because of different local ideas and interests about education? That kind of, those two are sort of similar. So Masuda and Sehar, please kind of address them indistinctively. And then from Bidemi, Carol to Mike, have you shared these data with WAEC? And if so, what was their response? So let's take it away, guys. Thanks.
Should I start?
Yeah, why don't we, let's start with Masuda since
and quickly, I'll be short. So Marla, in response to your question, I would say the concerns are very similar because there's some structural problems with the way aid is delivered and in kind of incentives it creates. So as you won't be, it's not a surprise that even in the Nigeria case, the SBMC members which are mobilized, they're mobilized through quite a few materialistic kind of incentives. While a lot of organic participation in the same community, parent-teacher association are meant to be, your voluntary time. So in this one, the expectations of the parents and communities beyond a point where that they should be paid for the work they are doing. I'm just giving you that as an example, and that's the kind of concern I raise in my book, that when you mobilize community through a very financially driven kind of a model, rather than trying to bring in their, inner kind of intrinsic motivation to participate, you eventually run into models which collapse as soon as donor, support goes away, and that's what we are seeing in SBMCs. As one problem, but then there's also a systematic flaw with these models because the artificial is very you tell these people to come together and do these limited kind of functions, which is again a concern I raise in my book, a typical concern with aid, that planners are saying come together, ask the teacher these things to do, while on the other hand the community wants something else done through the school, but you don't let that be voiced because donors think they know better, their advisors know better what how monitoring should be done. So do you understand? So those classic concerns are reflected in this concern too, but hopefully I raise a bit more issues in the paper itself, like beyond these two, these concerns as well.
All right. Sihar?
As far as the tensions are concerned, I do not think so that they are creating one because, apart from citizen-led assessment, there is no other kind of assessment or data set that is available to, even policymakers or citizens to think about. I guess it has definitely raised a kind of a discourse even amongst the community members as well as especially amongst the policymakers, because initially, I guess the focus of, even in Pakistan, the focus was just on increasing enrollment. But because of these assessment and because of the continuous hue and cry that kids are not learning at all, those who are going to school are not learning, and by continuously pushing, by telling them and by highlighting the fact that, kids, of course, in grade 5 and 3 are absolutely not able to, read the basics. That is how the focus actually has changed. And I guess if it has brought a discourse, it has brought a good angle to it. But I do not think so it has created a kind of a tension at all, because it's the only data set that is actually creating a debate and a discourse so that people actually can take action. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, thanks. Last question is for you, Mike.
Well, so regarding whether we share this work with WAEC, yes, we've done 2 levels of engagement with WAEC with very useful feedback from WAEC going forward. Indeed, the disclosure we've made from the beginning of this study, and indeed this presentation, is the fact that we have we limited this study to the core mathematics because that gives us more leverage in terms of objective responses that can be established for this study. But quickly, let me turn back to the question that was asked around the WAEC issue around consistency and so on. I think one issue we want to take forward is that, yes, we could certainly do the norm reference and get rank order issues for kids each year for selection, but the test is largely allow that at the moment we did our work. And also, it's quite difficult getting the microdata, as we said earlier. But the fact is, when we give up the ability for the test to maintain consistent educational standards, we are left with something that needs to be done in terms of reference tests across changes in system performance. And so that, together with the last question that just came in from someone around SAT, whether it works. The person wanted to know whether standardized assessment for like SAT do have inconsistencies across years, whether it will apply. The answer we will give here is no, because the way that test is designed is uses overlapping items and they can statistically be linked. To that end, 650 questions in year A means 650 questions in year B. That's the response I'll give to the 3. Thanks.
Okay, Mike, you went ahead and answered some of the questions that were already in the Q&A, so I won't re-ask it. I'll ask a slightly different one that came from Claire. So from Alex Abel to Sehar, and by the way, if some of these questions start to generalize about the whole class of PIL or citizen-led assessments, if you don't feel confident or competent to answer broad questions, just go ahead, feel free to go ahead and punt and say that you can't answer it. So from Alex for Sehar, how might interested parties access the exciting data that you told us about? From Samantha Ross for Sehar, how are the citizen-led assessments funded? What is the cost per child? Are ministries of education budgeting for these? And I'll skip the other question from Mike because he already answered it. But from Claire Lever, do you think some of the variation in difficulty is arising because test takers are trying to achieve the objective of unpredictability? The two are conceptually distinct, but in practice, it is hard to achieve unpredictability without varying the difficulty. So Mike, if you could address that one instead. And we have literally 10 minutes. So actually, this is going better than I thought. Yeah, Alex, Sehar, go ahead with the two questions for you, and then Mike, the question from Claire.
Yeah, sure. So I've actually mentioned that, the dataset is available on the website. It's very easy to download for everybody. So, the tools, the dataset, the manuals, it is available on the website for everybody to use. Even for Pratham, even for Asa Pakistan, for other countries, even at the website of PAL Network, the tools and everything else is just available online for everybody to download. So that's not the point. So it's very simple. It's very easy. Number two, the cost per child, the cost, it's nothing at all, because, we actually pay volunteers just a very minimal amount, which is not more than, I guess, it is a very minimalistic amount which we pay to the volunteers so that they can just go to the household and just collect information. So it is not about cost per child because we are not, providing anything to the children or to the household. It's just the cost of the volunteer. It's just the cost of a very simple training. So yet it is funded by different organizations, but the cost per child is very minimalistic because we just pay the volunteer for just a day. So thank you.
Okay, Mike? Mike, do you see your question?
Yeah, sure. I've seen my question. So largely, yes. Do you think some of the variation test question difficulties arising because test setters are trying to achieve the objective of unpredictability? That would be the plausibly yes answer to that question. The reason why it is plausibly yes is that as we might have, as we have provided in our paper, the conceptual linking was a basis of a number of issues. And largely the study we did is a border on issue of validity and issue of reliability. And the two taken together, when we push issues of validity, which normally require producing a number of evidence, and then also reliability, establishing consistency over time, I think these pieces are picked together. But the equation or the element of difficulty as exposed in this study comes in handy in that if we wrote out, let's say 10 items and had to guess how hard they were, we'll all get it way, way wrong, as it were. And so these kind of elements are issues that come to the picture when we want to establish consistency measurement and indeed reliability measurement in assessment.
Okay. Thank you very much to the presenters. I don't know that, Jason, do we have any outstanding questions? Let me myself have a quick look here. No, I think we should be fine. Let me try to wrap it up then. Actually, there's one question left here from Miguel Rico Subosa. Non-state actors have a growing role in educational provision, especially in lower and middle income countries. This poses a challenge for school monitoring and evaluation and data collection in general. How do organizations like WIAC, us here, ensure the accountability of non-state educational institutions? Let me just make a dictatorial decision here to let Mike and Sahir address that for literally 30 seconds, and then I'll try to wrap up. We do have a few minutes to go available. So if Mike and Sahir, like literally 30 seconds, and then I'll try to wrap up.
Well, for me, I think largely the key issues we've flagged are really important, and the argument is in the Ghanaian press as well as the public debate. When our working paper came out, there have been a number of hot debates around the subjects, and we've received useful feedback from a lot of people. And largely, we think these are all issues that require redress, and it's already beginning to open a Pandora box of issues that need to be done to be able to bring to the picture of the learning assessment that occurs, as well as the exam regimes that is practiced in Ghana into sharp context. Those will be my concluding remarks. And the fact that we have discussed this fairly well with WAEC, and of course, they have a number of reasons to produce. Our study had a focus. And indeed, the findings related to this study is as a result of the focus the study had. And so the issues taken thereof can be used by WAEC as well as other end users, scholars, as well as practitioners, all taken together.
Okay, thanks. Oh, sorry.
Sorry, can I go ahead? Do you have time?
Yes. I'm sorry, I forgot. Yes, go.
No problem. So, ASA Pakistan actually do collect information from the non-state actors also. So when we go and survey one government school, we also collect information from one private school of the same area. So just to see that, what kind of facilities they are providing, how many teachers were there, whether there's an issue of multi-grade teaching or not. So I guess that, yes, ASA Pakistan, it is a part of citizen assessment, and we do take it into account that non-state actors are actually also monitored to some extent. And yeah, the information is also provided. So yeah, thank you.
Okay. Let me see. There was one quick request from Alex. Let's see if I can find it. Alex, go ahead if you promise to do it in 10 seconds and direct the question, and the response will be 15 or 20 seconds. See if you can do that.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, go.
All right. Quick question for Masuda. If you've already said this, I apologize, but could you tell us what the most exciting open question is for understanding parental involvement in schools?
Whoa, that's a pretty big question.
That's a tricky one, but from what we are seeing, the work I could not present it as a part of the paper today is that Pratham itself is undergoing some very interesting work right now in terms of community participation, and it's moving a lot towards even involving illiterate mothers, coming up with methods that they can support the child in learning, which I was frankly surprised. I hadn't seen that you can actually, because it's more like they're showing that even if illiterate mother sits with the child and goes through the notebook, it has an impact. Similarly, she can do activities like non-educational activities, but they contribute to learning. So they're moving to this model, which is like Hamara Gaon, like my community, which is outside the state school. And Pratham, if you look at their own papers and all, the way Rukmini argues as well in those papers, is this that if you can involve communities in education process, and that's where they take credit, that their information dissemination is about telling communities how to use very simple tools to actually see for yourself your child is not learning in school, and repeatedly they're showing that once the community, mothers, parents, the general community members do those activities with children, and they realize the education level is so low for the given grade by using those simple tools that illiterate people can use, communities do generally get engaged. So do you understand that model is very different than this donor-driven model, which says that, come together, hold these formal accountability meetings with teachers, and somehow they'll improve in a system where, community cannot hold a state government teacher accountable in any formal way. So I think, in a short, quick way, I can only say that engaging communities generally in the education process, that's what Pratham is showing us, can lead to a lot of innovative model in coming years. And that's why I feel there is scope for fresh thinking right now, it seems, in how you mobilize communities to contribute to education.
All right, thanks a lot, everybody. And let me just try to wrap up. Questions are still coming in, but I'm afraid there's no time. So just to quickly wrap up. I think Miguel's comment or question is kind of an interesting one that gives me a way to wrap up. Using data for accountability is really difficult. It's, I guess, one question. And bodies like WAEC were not designed for accountability. They weren't even designed to be accountable themselves to the citizens. They're ranking exams, filtering places and availability of places at university or at secondary school. So that's one thing to take into account, is we've given them a new mission, in a sense, that wasn't there before and that they weren't necessarily designed for. So we need to take these things into account very carefully as we use measurement for accountability. And then the other big, I think, point would be a lot of these organizations think that the accountability and the supply response is not up to them because they're focused on measurement. The supply response needs to, in ASER, for example, really should come from Pratham, is what they might say. And if it's in the public sector, it's from the parts of the ministry that are in charge of supplying the response to the accountability pressure. So I think, we have to be careful as to how much we demand from institutions that are mostly about measurement. They need to fit into a system, and they need to have a theory or be given a theory from the system as to how the system will respond to the measurement accountability pressure. So I think it would be useful as we go forward to keep some of these distinctions in mind as to the mission of these organizations and the possibility that giving them too many missions might dilute their impact and so on, while taking into account the fact that there has to be a response context, a supply response context. Otherwise, what's the point? Subtle and complex issues, not to be dealt with in minus 1 minute. So I'll leave it at that.
Right, thanks everyone for that fascinating first session. I thought you might be interested to know that we had a total of 133 participants joining us from around the world, as well as people within our hubs in 3 locations. We're going to take a 15-minute break now and be back at 2:30. And the next session will be for an hour and a half, and we'll finish at 4. And then we have a final session after that. Okay, look at the encyclopedia as well.
Thank you.